We welcome you back to this channel. Today, we'll hear 3 horror stories about wells. Discover the tales of those who dared to confront the entities that dwell at the bottom of these cursed wells. Go ahead, turn off the lights, and let's take one more step into the world of the unknown.
The Nocturnal Growl.
What happened to me a few years ago changed everything I thought I knew. I decided to move into an old house in a small town, seeking peace and quiet to focus on writing my book. The house was old, but it had a charm that immediately drew me in. The seller warned me about the well in the backyard, suggesting that I avoid it. He told me it had been dry for many years and that it was best to stay away from it. I didn't pay much attention, but out of caution, I decided to follow his advice. The first few nights were peaceful. However, one early morning, I woke up to a deep whisper that seemed to come from some dark corner of the house. I ignored it, thinking it was the wind or maybe an animal. But the whispers continued night after night, always in the same deep and grave tone, as if someone was calling to me from afar. There was something about the well that caught my attention. One night, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. As I approached, I felt an inexplicable cold that made me shiver. I leaned over the edge and looked down. At first, I saw nothing, just an abyss of darkness. But then I noticed something moving at the bottom. I stepped back, frightened, and suddenly I saw a hand emerge from the well. A thin, skeletal hand with long, sharp fingers like claws. The skin was grayish, stretched tight over the bones, with dark veins pulsing beneath the surface. I let out a loud scream and ran back to the house. I went back inside, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Now I knew it wasn't the wind. It was a voice, a cold and distant voice coming from that creature inside the well. I felt fear take hold of me, a terror I had never experienced before. Finally, I decided to return. I couldn't stop thinking about how I had left the well uncovered and how that entity could get out. I went out, walking slowly towards the well, determined to face whatever was tormenting me. When I arrived, I saw that the stone cover was displaced. I stood still, staring at the dark opening, knowing something was about to happen. Suddenly, I felt a chill. I knew there was something behind me. I took a deep breath and quickly turned around, but there was nothing, just my backyard illuminated by the moonlight. I felt a momentary relief until I heard a guttural sound coming from the well, like the roar of a creature that couldn't be from this world. I leaned over and saw it. It was a tall, thin being, with its body twisted in an unnatural way. Its eyes were sunken, surrounded by gray flesh, and in its mouth sharp teeth were visible. Its yellow, piercing eyes looked at me with a hatred that chilled my blood. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't respond. I could see that creature coming closer and closer, climbing up the walls of the well. It moved slowly, its body moving awkwardly, slipping and climbing again. A cold sweat ran down my back and panic took over my mind. Something prevented me from moving. I couldn't stop staring at that creature, feeling its gaze fixed on my eyes. With each movement, its bones creaked. I still don't understand where I found the courage and strength to move, but I did. And I managed to put the stone back and cover the well, hearing that strange growl one last time. I ran to the house and closed the door, feeling pursued, even though I knew that creature couldn't get out. I lay down to sleep, but the whispers continued, though a bit more distant. I couldn't escape the terror that had taken hold of me. Every time I closed my eyes to try to sleep, that growl and the creaking of its bones as it tried to climb the walls of the well repeated in my mind. I spent the night wide awake, praying for the dawn to come quickly. The dawn finally came. I knew I couldn't stay there, that the whispers from that creature wouldn't leave me in peace. I packed my bags quickly and left, leaving the house behind. But the fear never disappeared. Sometimes, in the stillness of the night, I can still hear those growls, like a distant echo, reminding me that what I saw wasn't a dream. It was all too real.
The Forgotten Girl.
A few years ago, I went to spend a summer with my grandmother. I was 14 years old, and she lived in a small town surrounded by hills and dense forests. Many stories were told in the town, but I never thought I would become part of one. My grandmother always told me to avoid the old farm at the edge of the forest. There, in the middle of the backyard, was a well that, according to her, was cursed. A girl fell into that well a long time ago, and no one came for her, so she haunts those who approach it. But like any teenager, I didn't take it seriously. I thought they were just stories to scare me. One afternoon, my friend Mike and I decided to venture out and go to that place. We crossed the forest until we reached the abandoned farm. The place seemed to resist the passage of time. The house's walls were covered in moss and the structure leaned slightly. The air was heavy and the feeling of being watched followed us as soon as we set foot in the yard. The well, however, was what attracted us the most. It was in the center, surrounded by ancient stones covered in vines. Something about its presence gave me a chill, but I didn't want to show fear in front of my friend. Mike and I looked at each other and almost simultaneously looked down. At that moment, the world seemed to stop. It was just the well and me. Then I saw something that caught my attention. I thought it was my reflection, but it wasn't. What I saw was the pale face of a girl slowly emerging from the shadows. Her skin was very white, clinging to her bones in a grotesque grimace. Her eyes, two black pits like the abyss itself, were fixed on me, motionless, empty. I couldn't move as that thing ascended, getting closer and closer. I could see the strands of dark, wet, and sticky hair falling over her face. She wore an old dress, soaked and torn, as if she had been trapped at the bottom of the well for centuries. Suddenly, a scream broke the silence. It was Mike. His voice freed me from the trance. I looked up and stepped back. My friend was on the ground. The terror on his face was unmistakable. I helped him up, and before we left, I looked into the well and the girl had disappeared. It was getting dark and we didn't say a word. We both knew exactly what the other had seen. We said our goodbyes and each ran home. That night I went to Mike's house. We wanted to convince ourselves that what we had seen wasn't real, but something had changed in him. He was paler than usual, and the terror he felt from what we had experienced was undeniable. After a while, Mike suddenly stood up, his face completely contorted. "She's here," he shouted, pointing toward the window. I turned my head, and what I saw left me frozen. Outside was the same girl from the well. Her figure was clearer this time, but just as horrifying. Her black, empty eyes were fixed on us, and I could see her mouth open in a silent scream. But what horrified me the most was the puddle of water beneath her feet, as if she were still trapped in the well. We could see the girl slowly approaching, gliding across the ground. I could feel the air growing denser, heavier. Just as she was about to cross the threshold, the image faded, as if she had never been there, leaving only the trail of water she had left behind. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't dare close my eyes for fear that if I did, she would be there, waiting. At dawn, I went straight to talk to my grandmother. I needed answers, and something told me she had them. I found her in the kitchen. I didn't need to say anything. She knew what had happened just by looking at me. She sat next to me, taking my trembling hands in hers. She whispered that the well had been cursed a long time ago, and that when the girl fell in, everyone forgot about her, and no one looked for her. Since then, her spirit has been trapped, haunting those who come near. Over time, I tried to move on, to forget what I had seen, but I never could. The image of that girl haunted me, appearing in my dreams, stalking me in the darkness of my room. Recently, I met up with Mike, and he told me that the old farm had been demolished, and the well had been sealed with concrete. Instead of giving me peace, it only stirred up what I so desperately wanted to forget. That face, those black eyes still look at me every time I close my eyes, reminding me that there are things in this world that shouldn't be seen, things that are better left buried in oblivion.
Endless whisper.
I've always been fascinated by urban exploration, investigating abandoned places, searching for hidden stories in the ruins. This time, my steps led me to an ancient well on the outskirts of a small town, a place that, according to local legends, was cursed. I arrived at the location early in the afternoon. I had read enough to know that the well had once been part of an old mansion whose past was shrouded in mystery. The remains of the grand house were little more than rubble, and the only thing that remained almost intact was the well, covered in moss. I approached cautiously. However, as I moved the wooden cover aside, a stench of dampness emanated from the well, wrapping around me in a nearly palpable disgust. I leaned over the edge, trying to see the bottom, but the darkness was so dense it seemed to absorb the light. I turned on my flashlight and aimed it downward. The beam of light revealed the wet, slippery walls but couldn't reach the bottom. That's when I heard it. A faint whisper, barely perceptible, coming from deep within the well. I straightened up, feeling a growing discomfort but unable to pinpoint the exact reason. I decided to take out the rope I had brought with me, securing it to a large rock nearby. My plan was to lower the flashlight a bit more and see if I could catch anything else. As the rope descended, the whisper returned, this time clearer, more insistent, as if it wanted to tell me something, but I couldn't understand the words. Suddenly, the rope tightened violently, as if something was pulling it down with superhuman strength. I let go of the rope instinctively, watching it slide quickly into the darkness. A second later, a blast of icy air shot up from the well, enveloping me in an intense cold. It was at that moment that I saw her. A figure began to take shape. It was a woman, or at least that's what it seemed. Her skin was swollen and grayish, as if she had been submerged in water for too long. Her eyes, two empty sockets, stared at me intently, and her mouth was like a gash on her deformed face. A primitive terror took hold of me. The woman was sliding up the walls of the well as if gravity had no effect on her. Unable to look away, I took a step back, tripping over the rubble and falling onto my back. From the ground, I watched her completely emerge from the well, her body floating a few inches above the ground, as if she were still suspended in water. I tried to move, but I couldn't. Desperate, I managed to roll to the side, away from her. The pressure I felt eased just enough for me to get up and run to my car, fleeing the place without daring to look back. The days that followed were a mix of terror and paranoia. I felt her presence in every shadow, heard her whispers in every corner of my house. Sleeping became almost impossible, and when I did manage to fall asleep, the woman appeared in my nightmares. A week passed before I decided to return to the place. I don't know what drove me to do it. Perhaps it was the need to face my fear, or maybe to satisfy the constant curiosity about what I had seen. I brought a recording device with me, determined to document whatever it was I had encountered. This time I arrived at dusk. I approached the well with my heart pounding in my chest, turning on the flashlight and pointing it inside. This time I didn't wait to hear the whispers. I started recording immediately, lowering the flashlight once more with the rope. The whisper came again, but this time it was much louder. I felt dizzy, as if the well was draining my energy. Suddenly, the rope tightened with such force that I was pulled towards the edge. I struggled to keep my balance, but it was useless. I felt a hand on my shoulder, and when I turned around, I saw her again. The woman from the well was there, her grotesque face close to mine. She clung to my arm, trying to drag me into the well. I resisted with all my strength, but her grip wouldn't loosen. The cold began to spread up my leg, quickly rising towards my torso. In a final act of desperation, I yanked my arm free and started screaming with all my might. I could only feel the woman's fury until, for a brief second, her grip loosened. I took that moment to escape. I ran towards the car, feeling her chasing me and hearing the whisper echoing in my ears like a distant echo. I managed to reach the car, but when I tried to start it, the engine refused to turn over. I looked up and saw the woman appear in front of the car, her empty eyes staring straight at me. Her mouth opened, releasing a terrifying scream, and I felt something inside me start to break. I tried the engine again, and it finally started. I slammed on the gas and sped away from there as fast as I could. Since that night, My life has never been the same. Sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I hear a whisper in the wind, a murmur that reminds me of that well. I can't stop thinking that curiosity can lead us down paths we should avoid.
Thank you for journeying with us through the dark passages of these stories. If you enjoyed them, give us a like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss more tales of terror. Until next time, where fear will once again be your companion.